In the previous sessions, we saw biblical understanding of pornography. We saw the importance of teaching against it and the role as church leaders in this regard. In this session, we will see some practical steps that we can take to guard both ourselves and the flock that God has given us to oversee. Now, in the exhortation that Paul the Apostle gives to the Ephesian elders in Acts 20, we read that in verse 28, we read, "Pay careful attention to yourself and to all the flock that that the Holy Spirit has made you overseers to care for the church of God, which he obtained with his own blood." Now, there is a need to take some intentional and practical steps, and so that we as leaders and our flock are kept safe. And so I want to cover 5 practical steps that we can take. The first is don't be deceived. Second is don't linger. Third is make a covenant. Fourth is commit to put flesh to death. And fifth is use Alvin Cooper's 3-step process. So we'll go through this one by one. Don't be deceived. There's this false sense of privacy. You see, we are in a world where privacy is a highly valued commodity, and for good reason, but it's when this good thing is put to bad use in trying to cover sin, in hiding sin, that we have a problem. The culture that we are in is it's my life, and clubbed with this false pretense of privacy actually causes even intentional Christian to be trapped. And so we must understand that pornography is a trap. Again, our culture is the risk is evaluated at the potential of being caught. As the saying goes, in Jersey, anything is legal as long as you're not caught. We need to stop false rationalization. There's no excuse for sin in our life and to hide it from our family members. We do that often sometimes for the greater good or for the family honor. To excuse sin for a greater good, be it family, be it even ministry, we must understand is wrong, because that is just a sinful rationalization. As one pastor put it, that I was in a 6-month affair at the same time preaching and counseling against adultery and telling myself that God didn't care because the church was growing. Don't be deceived. Porn lies with a straight face. Second, don't linger. Tear down that image. Our mind is constantly creating these images, and so it's important that we don't linger. A cover magazine that, as we stand at the cashier's register, can sear itself into our mind, and so can soon develop into fantasies if we were to dwell on it. At its root, porn is about worship, self-worship. And I'll tell you why. Because addiction to pornography demands a disproportionate dwelling of our mind, and our desires, therefore, are very selfish, leading to selfish satisfaction. And anything that occupies our thoughts and motivates our actions can soon become a god, and pornography can therefore be the god we worship. Secondly, have a low tolerance for sin. Be convinced that little is too much, and that this culture of compromise that we live in, that allows for compatibility of sin in a Christian's life, is unbiblical, that we would not compromise. And we often seek these boundaries of tolerance. We ask questions like, is this okay? Or how much is okay? Is this addiction? Or when does it become porn? The question, in effect, we're asking ourselves is, what proportion of sin is bad? Well, the answer is obvious, isn't it? And so we must understand that as we ask these questions, it sets us up for being desensitized to sin. So don't be deceived, don't linger. And thirdly, make a covenant. I love the way the the book of Job starts. As soon as we are introduced to Job, we are introduced to his character. And let's see what Job is telling us. If you will turn to Job chapter 1, verse 1, he tells us one thing, to turn away from evil. And it says there was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Job was in effect telling us that he does not linger, that he turns away from evil. You see, sometimes we are unable not to look at it at the first time, but Job is saying, don't go for the second look, don't linger. It's in the second look that often these images get seared into our souls. And then it's interesting, as Job continues and we get down to chapter 31, verse 1, by this time Job is telling us, don't just linger for the second look, but that he's also learned that there are certain places he would not look even for the first time. And therefore, in Job 31, verse 1, it says, I have made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin? I was talking to somebody, and that person gave me a very good insight, a practical tip. He said that he has made a covenant not to look below the chin of the opposite gender. That's a great tip. And intentionality of keeping ourselves pure is evident in that. So don't be deceived, don't linger, make a covenant. And the fourth is commit to put flesh to death. We read this about Paul and of how he had learned discipline. It didn't come to him naturally. He learned discipline, and so that gives us the motivation that we can learn too. So if you will turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and 24 to 27. Do you not know that in a race all runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself be disqualified. That's a great example to follow. And so in trying to understand these practical tips, the last of the practical tip is to follow the three-step process of breaking this grip of pornography. Late psychologist Alvin Cooper believed that there are three main factors, and these could be seen as the three-legged stool. They are accessibility, affordability, and anonymity. Accessibility, affordability, and anonymity. And he dubbed them the AAA engine. And the good news is, being a three-legged stool, if you take one of the legs off, the whole thing collapses. And so it makes that much possible for us to break that sense of addiction. So first is accessibility. This deals with the ease of accessing the content online. And the way we remove this leg is to make access difficult. We can make access difficult by putting reliable filters, having parental control both for our children, and also having an accountability partner who keeps the password to prevent it. You see, these unprotected Wi-Fi without filters allows for access, especially in the secluded corners of our home, and that is a dangerous trend. Second, don't trust movie ratings. PG-13 is full of offensive language and explicit sexual content that can assault the mind and soil the heart. That is something we must treat our soul's windows and board it up against, just as we would do when there's a storm warning. We would board up the windows, that we would be careful what we will allow to pass through to our soul. The second is affordability. This deals with the cost of accessing online content. The internet has made affordability a non-issue. You see, 70% of porn available is free, and yet if you caught that, porn is a $400 billion industry, and that must tell us something, that this slip between free porn to paid porn is very slippery indeed, and unfortunately men and women get trapped in it, not realizing that it's one of the hardest legs to remove. One of the practical tips that I heard of was, that the credit card statement would be accessible to both spouses, so that they'd be able to see any indiscriminate payments that have been made. The third is anonymity. This deals with the private issue, privacy that we dealt with, the allowance of our society to hide, to cover what is personal. And this is entirely within the control of the person, of how much they'd be willing to reveal and to hold themselves accountable. And so in that sense, this is the easiest of the leg to remove. So I want to dwell a little bit longer on this leg so that we can get some practical tips that we can take away. And I want to bring us another three things that we can understand this. One is awareness, second is accountability, and third is accessories. Awareness. Be aware of the presence of God. As the old Latin phrase says, coram Deo, be aware of the nearness of God. Psalmist reminds us in Psalm 73:28, the nearness of my God is my good. Second is accountability. This refers to having an accountability partner. We'll deal with this in a little detail in the next session, but having an accountability partner is so important. And the third is accessories. Having technology and using that is a good tool that'll help remove that anonymity of the use of the internet. And there are many websites and tools that we can that have been referenced actually in the additional resources if you look up on our website. So in summary, what are some of the practical tips that we can guard ourselves, we use for guarding ourselves and the flock? One is having a low tolerance of evil. Second is make a covenant like Job. Third, Alvin Cooper's AAA engine tool, remove one of those legs to break the cycle of addiction. And I hope some of these tips resound with us and that we will be disciplined enough to put them to practice.